so much of our understanding of the importance of sleep circadian rhythms is because what happens if we disrupt them? And you can think about this disruption in three domains: its impact on our emotional responses, our our cognitive responses, our ability to process information, and long term, what's happening to our physiology and our health. If we think about emotional responses, even 1 or 2 nights without sleep, and we've all experienced this, I'm sure, you see that we're much more prone to fluctuations in our mood. We bounce across different states. We're much more irritable. We show much higher levels of anxiety. We've lost empathy. This is, I think, is so fascinating. We fail to pick up the social signals of our colleagues, our friends, our family. Increased levels of frustration, risk taking, and impulsivity. The tired brain will think, oh, yeah, I'm sure I can get through that traffic light before it turns red, and it will try. Whereas the fully rested brain will say, don't be ridiculous. Of course you shouldn't. And why would you bother anyway? That's a really interesting phenomenon. Negative salience, which is such an important area, and some lovely studies from Germany have showed that the tired brain remembers negative experiences but forgets the more positive ones. And so one's whole world view when you're tired is biased towards a remembrance of negative experiences. We're much more likely to slide into, because of these changes in our ability to use caffeine and other stimulants, and indeed alcohol and sedatives, to try and reverse the effects of those stimulants. And so many people fall into the trap of driving the working day with endless cups of coffee, and of course, caffeine can last in the body 5 or even as much as 9 hours. So it comes to bedtime and think, oh my goodness, I've got to get some sleep. What am I going to do? Well, I'll take a few drams of whiskey or whatever. And of course, that's a sedative. And like other sleeping tablets, that doesn't provide a biological mimic for sleep. It's a sedative. And in fact, it can disrupt some of the important things going on in the brain whilst we sleep. So those are some of the emotional impacts. If we think of cognitive responses, overall, our ability to process information is depressed after loss of sleep. Our ability to multitask. What we're good at as humans is being bombarded with information and then selecting out what's the most relevant and responding to that. And we're not good at that when we're tired. Our memory consolidation and our information processing. I mean, there's some really good stuff here about how we need sleep to process information. There's a wonderful study by Jan Bourne's group, who he developed a really tough task that people had to perform, and he introduced it to one group in the morning, and they had to perform it that afternoon. So they became familiar with the task, had to perform it in the afternoon. Hard task, only about 20% of the group got the right answer. The second group, introduced to the task in the morning, they performed it the following afternoon, but they were deprived of sleep. Interestingly, about 20% of the group solved the problem. The third group, which is the interesting one, introduced to the task in the morning, became familiar with it, performed it the following afternoon, but allowed to sleep perfectly normally. 60 to 70% of the group solved the problem. Brilliant illustration of the importance of sleep for problem solving. And that goes along with our ability to, communicate and decision making, and our whole creativity and productivity. And if we think about individuals, not just night shift workers, but other individuals in the workplace who are experiencing very little sleep, you see, of course, daytime sleepiness and microsleeps. There's a very interesting study on junior doctors showing that after the night shift, 57% of these individuals had either had a crash or a near miss driving home after the night shift. We see in night shift workers high rates of cardiovascular disease, altered stress responses. It seems that what a night shift worker has to do is a function when their entire biology is saying you should be asleep. And the way to override that, and we may be the only species that can really do that, is to activate the stress axis. So we're throwing out lots of glucose into the circulation. Heart rate is going up. We're sort of forcing our bodies to be active when they really want to sleep. The downside of those altered stress responses is lowered immunity. The one thing we know about high levels of cortisol is it suppresses the immune system, and you see higher rates of infection. In night shift workers, you also see higher rates of cancer. So, some very important studies on night shift nurses has shown higher rates of colorectal cancer and breast cancer. And the data are so strong that the World Health Organization has now designated night shift work as a probable carcinogen because of those correlates. You get metabolic abnormalities because, again, massively altered stress responses, type 2 diabetes, and also, and this is an area where we have worked, is levels of depression and psychosis can become worse after sleep disruption. And finally, if that wasn't enough, that poor sleep during the middle years, and I mean, highly disrupted sleep during the middle years, has been associated with an increased risk of dementia as you age. And that could be as a result of a newly discovered toxin clearance system called the glymphatic system. This is something that can take out, toxins that can build up in the brain. One of which is beta amyloid, which of course is this misfolded protein which acts as like chewing gum in cells and gums them up and is associated with dementia. And it's been shown that when we sleep, the glymphatic system is particularly active and clears some of these toxins out of the body, which may be the correlation between why terrible sleep in middle years is a risk factor for dementia later on. I'd never say that poor sleep is going to cause dementia, but if you are vulnerable to the development of dementia, then getting poor sleep could well be a risk factor.